Yes, it is possible to write a book in one day with AI, and actually in some cases without AI. I will get into that. Although it is probably not exactly what you think. In this video, I will walk you through all of the different ways that you can create a single book in one day using AI or not. And then at the end, I will show you exactly what to do with those books once you have them, where to publish them, what to do, just all of that. So let's get into it. First, let's be clear, we're not talking about writing a full book here. A full book, in my estimation, matches the official definition of a novel, which is 40,000 words or above. Personally, I find it difficult to even read a 40,000 word book in a day. And if you can't read a 40,000 word book, then you can't write one, because you've got to, even if you can generate 40,000 words in a day, you've got to be able to validate those words and make sure that they make sense. And even if those words are genuinely good and you can breeze right through them and make sure that they're good, you still have to go through the whole thing and make sure it matches your vision. And to be honest, in most cases, this requires a lot of editing. So editing 40,000 words is definitely not something that I believe is doable in a single day. So instead, I'm talking about other types of books here, books that can be considered supplemental material for your flagship offers, which are your main books. And yes, to be clear, I don't really think that some of these can stand on their own, but I consider most of them to be the kind of thing that you would sell to your existing audience of your existing fiction or nonfiction books. So let's walk through exactly what this would look like, all of the different types. And if you want, I'll go do a deep dive on one of these in the future. Let me know in the comments which one of these is most interesting to you, and I'll see if I can do a deeper dive, so actually show you the process for each of these. But for now, we're just going to walk through all of them. So number one, young reader editions. This is actually one I'm getting pretty excited about myself. I was having a chat with one of my friends the other day who's a very accomplished author. He was basically recording himself creating these stories for his kids. He would tell his kids these stories at night. He would record himself. He would transcribe that recording and then turn it into a small young reader book. He was making these books in the style of a Goosebumps kind of short book. And I thought that was a really great idea. Something that I have also done is I've taken existing books and run them through an AI prompt that essentially takes each chapter and condenses it to a more reader-friendly book, something on the lines of the Magic Treehouse books, if you're familiar with those. And the reason I like that is because, first of all, I have a 4-year-old daughter. I have another one on the way, and I like to be able to share my work with them. But right now, my books are a little bit too high level for them to quite understand. And so having something that's been condensed just a little bit and made more into a language that they can understand is really helpful. And this is something that AI is really good at, taking more complicated language and simplifying it down to something that a 4-year-old could understand. And using a tool like Novel Crafter or really any AI tool, you could pretty easily do this, where you just have a standard prompt and then you run each chapter of your book through that prompt and it condenses it down, and then you take that and format it as a separate book. It really would probably only take maybe a couple of hours total to do this, and so you could definitely do it in a day. Number two, public domain books. Now, this is similar to the Young Reader Edition, funny enough. There are tons of public domain resources out there for you to use, and usually I like to find a couple that are relevant to the books that I'm writing. Now, for me, it's a little easier because I write historical fantasy, and so I can easily find some like mythology books and things like that that are in the public domain that I can include. For instance, I've been working on a book that's kind of a sequel to the novel Dracula, so I could easily just take Dracula and use that. Now, you could just take the public domain book and just use it as is and do nothing else with it. That's totally fine. But if you want to publish it to Amazon, you do need to differentiate it in some way, and that's where AI can come in and help. AI can help you create annotations. It can create images, anything that you need for it to basically just make it different from other versions of these public domain works online. But one of my favorite things to do with these, especially for really older texts, like think the Odyssey or Canterbury Tales, where the original text is actually kind of difficult to understand for a modern reader, you can actually run a prompt through this similar to the Young Reader prompt that translates it into a more modern prose edition. I've done this with a epic poem called The Fairy Queen, which is very difficult for the layperson to understand. You have to be like, master's degree level college to really get it. And so I've taken that and I've condensed it to a more modern prose edition. And I say condensed, I don't really mean condensed, because it was more of a translation that uses an 8th grade reading level to create that book. And I've published that, and I've already gotten quite a few sales from it. So that's just a little idea if you want to take public domain books and repurpose them in such a way that it fits with, that it can tie into your novel. Or this is one of the few areas where I think you could create standalone products that don't have anything to do with your flagship titles. That could be really helpful for you. All right, number 3 is what I call lore books. Now there's actually quite a few things that fall under this category, so I'm going to spend a little time on this. Lore books are just like short little books that have something to do with your novel. This is something that definitely is more tie-in material rather than just standalone products, although you could potentially combine them together in such a way that it could make a standalone product. But generally speaking, I consider this to be something more akin, a tie-in to an existing title that you have. But what a lore book looks like is going to depend on what genre you're in. So I'm going to give you a couple of suggestions, but this is definitely not a comprehensive list, but this can hopefully get your ideas flowing. So first of all, romance. Okay, romance is maybe the toughest one on this list. But first of all, you can write a short story for any of these. Like, it's easy enough with AI these days to write a 5,000-6,000 word short story in a day. So you can easily start with that and then maybe add some supplemental material onto it. So with romance, you could do those short stories, but you could also do something like dating profiles for your characters or something fun and quirky like that, where you can get to know the characters a little bit more, maybe flesh out the world a little bit more for your readers. And I just like the idea of dating profiles. I think that's probably the best option here, plus some short stories. So that's for romance. For mystery, thriller, and maybe horror, I like a similar idea where you could do something like police case files or a detective's case files or something like that, where you've got information about crimes, about certain situations. You could do like a dossier on a spy or something like that. All of these sort of case file type things that are in universe, I think could be a really good option for that. Plus, of course, you've got the option of short stories. Like all of these genres, you have that option to add a short story to these as well. For fantasy and science fiction, it's pretty easy. You're just creating lore books. You're creating these little collections of information about your world. Think of it as a print version of a wiki or elements of your wiki. So you could get into the history of the world that you've built. You could talk about the technology and do blueprints, schematics, that kind of thing for technology in the case of a science fiction. Anything like that you could do. There's lots of stuff to explore with the world building. Chances are you've written a lot of this stuff already in the process of writing your novel, and all you have to do is just clean it up a little bit so that it can work as a lore book and actually publish this stuff so that others can see it. So it's a really great idea, and one that I've done in the past. I made one called The Dawn of Ra. I have taken that one down because it was more of an experiment, and I do have plans on fleshing out more lore books like this for my own worlds in the future, but I need to kind of rethink my process for that on how I want to do that. How many do I want to do? How frequently do I want to publish, etc. Similar to fantasy and science fiction is historical fiction. But in the case of historical fiction, obviously the lore is more based in truth. So you could write articles about the historical time period that you're covering and anything related to that historical time period. That would probably be the place that I would go with any kind of historical fiction lore book. Now, if you're writing an action or adventure kind of novel, I was thinking something like survival training. Maybe if you're doing like a zombie apocalypse kind of thing, you could do the kind of content that would be appropriate for someone like a prepper. Teaching people how to like build food storage and a bunker and like all of these things could be fun in situations like that. You'd have to think through the exact type of action adventure novel that you have written and what would be appropriate to that. But something along the lines of like survival skills, teaching some sort of skill like that, I think could be fun. Then we got dystopian fiction. So dystopian fiction is a little bit different because most dystopian novels are trying to highlight in a fictional way some kind of problem that we have in the modern day, usually. It's kind of taking a problem that we have in the modern day and putting it at the logical extreme in the form of a dystopian novel. And so one of the things you could do is just write essays about those problems that you're seeing in society and how you think we should solve them and what the dangers are. So you run the risk of getting a little bit too preachy, which is something I definitely recommend you try not to do with your dystopian novel or with any novel for that matter. The first job of any novel like that is to entertain and to draw people in, but they can also teach at the same time. And so if you want something that maybe teaches a little bit more overtly and directly, you could put together essays like that and put it into a lore book and publish that as a supplemental material to your flagship book. Lastly, I thought for comedy, you could do something like a joke book. pretty simple, right? Not a lot of comedy writers out there, but if you are one of those kind of comedy or satire writers, you could easily create some kind of joke book or some other comedic supplemental material like that could tie into your novel. So that's what I got for the lore book so far. But this next one, number 4, is very similar, and I almost included it in lore books, but I'm going to keep it as something separate, and that is in-universe books. Now, some of the things we talked about, like the dating profiles and the dossiers and the case files and stuff like that, that could also be all in-universe as well. But I think having in-universe short stories, in-universe lore can be a really fun thing. I was always a big fan of the Elder Scrolls series of video games like Skyrim. One of the things that they have in those video games, you can actually find books and read them, and they're all written from an in-universe perspective. And I've always found that to be extremely immersive. And even though those books in Skyrim are not particularly long, you can read them in a couple of minutes. It still sort of adds that extra dimension to the whole immersive experience. And I think we could do the same thing with your novels. So if you've written a novel, whether it's historical, fantasy, science fiction, even romance and like thriller mystery, there are opportunities for in-universe documents and books within that setting all over the place. And so I actually think these can be the same as lore books. You could write a lore book from an in-universe perspective, but it could also be this kind of extra special thing that you do. You know, it might actually take more than a day potentially to create one of these things if you want to do a really in-depth one, but it can be a really valuable and immersive tool for your audience, I think, to really get them excited about this world that you've created. So pay attention. Anytime you mention a book or a document or anything inside of your novel, think, could I actually turn this into a real book that people can read? And that's the sort of thing I think AI could really help you with, to get your ideas going and to actually, you know, if you give it that portion of your novel where you're talking about this particular in-universe document and say, help me create this document, that's the sort of thing AI could be really helpful in getting you a first draft of that document, and then you can modify it from there. All right, number 5 is coloring books. Now with AI, it is absolutely easy and possible to create coloring book pages within a matter of minutes. And so it's definitely easy, especially if you have some kind of template set up already, to create coloring books that you can produce and publish within a single day. Now, I will say there's a caveat to this. There are some additional steps that you might want to take to really clean up the coloring book pages that it gives you. You'll have to do a couple of initial tweaks, usually using a tool like Photoshop to remove like little weird artifacts and stuff like that. And then you might want to upscale it. You might also want to consider hiring someone that can just turn it into a vector file so that it cleans up the lines a little bit and turns it into like a vector file, can be any size whatsoever. So something like that. There are steps to kind of make these things even more polished and professional, but you can start with pages made entirely from AI and just start with that, maybe upscale it a little bit and then see how far you can push that. There are absolutely plenty of opportunities here, especially for your existing readers. I think it would be a little bit difficult to compete with the people that are out there trying to be professional coloring book artists. But if you just want something quick and easy that your readers could play around with that relates to your books, like you have coloring book pages from your novel. If you're not like Brandon Sanderson, right, you're not going to sell a lot of those. And so this is an important way that you could potentially engage your readers and get them excited about your stuff without spending a whole lot of money on professional artists and everything to actually create a proper coloring book. That said, AI is getting better and better. And so at some point, we're not going to be able to tell the difference between an AI generated coloring book page and that generated by a human. But even then, it's going to take some savvy business skills to be able to market these things, which the professionals already know how to do. All right, number 6, we've got puzzle and game books. So this could be a fun little thing. It's not too hard to come up with interesting puzzle scenarios and things like that, little games that you could play. Put those into a book, maybe add a few illustrations and examples. I'm sure there are plenty of puzzle generators out there. This is one of those things that you could probably have done in a day even before AI, because I know there are puzzle generators out there that make this easy. But you could also do things like Mad Lib style books that would be a little bit easier with the help of AI, and all kinds of different options for different kind of game and puzzle books. There's an infinite number of games, right? And so you can find specific niches on specific games that you could create, especially if it relates to other stuff that you've produced, that could really help engage your readers. Kind of along those lines, number 7 is a mini RPG campaign. So I feel like a full RPG book is going to take you a long time, especially if you're creating creating a whole new rule set and stuff like that. But you can absolutely create like a single campaign using AI in a day. So you can give it all of the information about your book and ask it to give you ideas on what kind of campaigns to do. And then you can pick one of those and run with it and see what it gives you. This is especially helpful if you're using a tool like Novel Crafter, which can basically take all of your world building information and then use that however you see fit. I'm currently in the process of building a giant compendium of world building knowledge for my Arthurian era of my my whole universe, just the Arthurian era for now. And that's going to help me not just to do stuff like this, but to brainstorm different series and everything. And it will know everything about my books. So it will know exactly like, does this fit in the continuity and stuff like that. And so I could easily take that and create, say, a Dungeons and Dragons campaign that's just, you know, a couple thousand words long and create one that fits inside of my universe, which I think is a great idea. Now, keep in mind that the AI is not always going to get everything right in terms of like what the rules are and everything like that. So you'll want to make sure that you are familiar with the rules and everything, the mechanics of the specific RPG that you're using, and make sure that your campaign fits with that. But I think you could easily create something like this in a day using AI. All right, for those of you who write nonfiction, I haven't left you out. I've got two more here. The first is what I just call a quick problem solve. So this could be a short little, almost pamphlet-like book that quickly and effectively solves a specific problem that your audience has. So for instance, I wrote a book called The Plot Module, which is all about helping authors to plot their books. I have the main book, which goes into detail on everything, but I thought it could be interesting to create smaller little quick books based on the plot module for each genre. So we have the plot module for fantasy, plot module for romance, etc. And those don't need to be as big as the main flagship book. So that's the kind of thing that you could do, where you could maybe adapt a different novel to different use cases like that. Or maybe you have specific problems that people face in your nonfiction business that you don't necessarily need to write a whole book about it. You can just kind of give them the quick solution in a small book like that. So that's option number 1 for you. Number 9 is workbooks / planners. And if you've written a nonfiction book, this is actually a common practice already to have a sort of companion workbook to go along with it. This is what we call low content, but low content can be effective if it is tied into your other existing material. Gone are the days where you could just create a simple lined notebook and put 300 different covers on it and hope that something out of those 300 planners actually works well. That kind of low content does not work these days. However, if you create low content books that's just like a workbook with different prompts to get people writing and thinking, that's the sort of thing, especially if it ties into other nonfiction work that you have created, that's the sort of thing that works really well in low content as a supplemental material, but something that people genuinely might want if they've read your nonfiction books. And that's all the ones I have for you. If you have any other ideas, be sure to let me know in the comments below. But the question now is, what do you actually do with these books? So I actually have a step-by-step process that you need to follow. First, you need to have a good cover. If you're not a solid cover designer, I've got links to 2 different cover designer agencies down below. The first is Get Covers. It is the most affordable. You can get something for as low as $10 there, which is actually really, really good. If you want something that's a little bit higher quality, you can go with Mibble-Art, also down below. They are one of my favorites when it comes to book covers, and I use them for all of my flagship books. They might be a little bit too pricey for supplemental books like this, so you could either go with Get Covers, or you could use AI to help develop the covers of these books. I have a whole video about generating book covers with AI, and I also have a video about Ideogram that you can check out as well. Those are great places to look if you want to know more about book covers using AI. I don't generally recommend using AI for what I've been calling the flagship books, your main books with the meat inside of them, essentially. But for lore books like this, where you're not necessarily trying to make a ton of money with them, at least for most of them, they're more supplemental books to your flagship books. That's the exact situation where I would consider using AI instead of using, a $200 or $300 book cover artist. So once you have your book cover, you'll need to format your book. And for me, the best formatting tool is Atticus. Also a link down below. There are other tools out there like Vellum. Vellum is Mac exclusive. It doesn't do anything that Atticus doesn't do, and it's also more money than Atticus. So I still generally recommend Atticus for most people. There aren't really any other good formatting tools other than those 2. You can get more advanced ones like Adobe InDesign, but that requires a lot of know-how. Even using a tool like Microsoft Word, while it is technically possible to format your book inside of Word, it is a lot of work and takes quite a bit of time, whereas Atticus can do it in a couple of clicks. So I recommend using Atticus to format your book. Once your book is formatted, then it's time to publish it. And I generally recommend starting with Amazon KDP. So Amazon KDP makes it easy to publish your books online through Amazon. For most of the books on this list, you'll be able to do that no problem. There might be some like public domain books where you'll have to check an extra box, and there might be additional questions that they send you in an email or something like that after the fact. But generally speaking, most of these, especially if they are truly original content, should have no problem going through Amazon. There's also another service called Draft2Digital, draft2digital.com, and they are a good resource for distributing your book everywhere else. Now, you can easily distribute your book yourself to the other major retailers besides Amazon, like Apple, Kobo, Google Books, Barnes & Noble, and so on. But there's also a ton of libraries and other things, like little small places where you wouldn't necessarily want to waste your time uploading your book to all of those different places, especially because you're probably going to need to update these books at some point. So then you have to go back through and update your books in all of those different places over again. It's just so much easier to use a tool like Draft2Digital. I don't use Draft2Digital for everything because they take a 10% cut of my profits, but I do use it for quite a number of all of the other places where I distribute my books. For me personally, because I don't want to spend the time to go and update my books everywhere, I publish my own books on Amazon, and then I publish them on Draft2Digital, which takes care of everything else. I do not individually publish my books on Apple, Barnes & Noble, etc. Even though those are the big ones, I just find it just much easier to just use Draft2Digital to cover all of those because it saves me a lot of time, and time is money. So I really appreciate Draft2Digital. So I'd go with those two. Publish on Amazon KDP and Draft2Digital. And then comes the marketing process. Now, hopefully at this point, if you've already released a flagship book, this should be no problem for you. You're already doing marketing for that. The best people to market these kinds of books to are your existing audience. So if you already have readers, maybe you've created an email list for your books, which you should definitely do. Create that email list. And then once you have people on that email list who are buying your books, you can sell these books to them as well. And it just gives another revenue source potentially. So that's a very high level overview of everything. I do have a video where I go in depth showing you the process of how to upload a book to KDP. So go check that out if you're interested in learning a little bit more, and I will see you in that video.